Well, good morning, everyone. Pleasure to see everybody here today for our lesson. We will open up our sermon today by looking at a passage from Mark chapter 12. So if you want to be ready in that passage, that's where we'll be when we start our lesson here in just a moment. Before we do that, though, I want to play a little game with you. I've got a couple of props here, and we're going to try something. I have one rule when it comes to this bottle of water. I'm not allowed to drink from the bottle of water. That's it. That's the rule. Do not drink from the bottle of water. Okay, it's open. So I'm already partially having a chance to make a mistake here, right? It's open, and so if I drink from this bottle, then I have broken the rule. Now, my favorite way to win any contest or beat any game is on a technicality. I don't like winning straight outright. I always feel much more satisfaction by getting to a win condition by default or technically being correct. So if I pour some of the water out of this water bottle, I haven't drank from the water bottle itself. I'm just going to drink out of this cup instead. So I didn't break the rules. I'm technically still safe. Water bottle doesn't have anything taken out of it by me directly. I didn't drink from it. I drank from the cup. There's still water in the bottle after all, and it's fine. So I still haven't broken the rule. I just drank from the cup instead. Technically, I'm not wrong. There's nothing in the rule which says don't drink from the water bottle, that says I can't do anything else to it too. If I add something else to it, and I mess with the water a little bit, there's nothing wrong with that. I still haven't drank from it, even though there's a piece of candy floating around in this now. It's still in there, and I didn't put my mouth on the water bottle. I didn't drink from the bottle itself. Nothing wrong there. Still just water. It just happens to have a piece of candy in it now. I'm technically still not breaking the rules. But if you've been paying attention, you probably see some problems with my way of thinking. You probably see some gaps in my logic. And that's because you're not thinking of this as a game. You're thinking of it as a word that has come from somebody else that told me what to do about this. If you were the person who gave me these instructions and said, don't drink from the water bottle, and you saw everything I just did to that water, you would say, you didn't do what I asked. Sure, you didn't break the words specifically as it was spoken, don't drink from the water bottle, but you've still taken something from the water bottle and you still drank it. And you then, on top of it, did something to the water that I never wanted you to do in the first place. Adding a piece of candy in there doesn't help anything, and it doesn't keep the water in the condition it was in before you found it. You've broken the spirit of the rule. You've broken the expectations of the person who's given you the rule, even if you're technically correct. So let's talk about our soul, our heart, our mind, our strength, and all of those things as they relate to love and our relationship with God and other people. In Mark chapter 12, people are asking Jesus important questions all the way throughout his career and his ministry. People come up and ask him what to do about certain things, and they asked him how to be obedient to God in certain ways. And one of the most significant moments for us here in Mark chapter 12 is a teacher asking Jesus during one of his times lecturing and speaking before the people, what is the most important command? Which commandment, which rule that God hands down, or which word from God is the most important? In Mark chapter 12 and verse 28, we see the following episode in Jesus' life. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Well said, teacher, the man replied. You are right in saying that God is one, and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he had answered wisely, he said, You are not far from the kingdom of God. And from then on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. In the last couple of lessons in this series on spiritual anatomy, we have discussed the heart, and we've discussed the overlap between the idea of the heart and mind. That in the Bible, the place where your emotions and your thoughts take place are the same thing. They didn't have a word or a concept in the Old Testament, for example, for the brain. So if you did any thinking, you did that thinking in your heart. You did all your feeling here, all of that sort of processing of your own internal way of thinking about the world, your reckoning, your thinking, your calculations, your emotion, that all takes place here. And today we're going to talk about Jesus' interpretation of one of the most important passages of the Old Testament for Jewish people and how it differs a little bit from our Old Testament translation, even in our English, and what some of the significance of that is. But first of all, let's just review what his actual point was when he's talking to this person. Because when you hear what is the greatest command, what you're probably hearing is a question that was debated throughout the entire time of Jewish history, and which is, of the 10 words, the 10 commandments that are engraved on the tablets that God himself wrote and handed to Moses and walked down from Mount Sinai, which of those is the most important? And it's kind of hard to pick one of those. Because if you pick, have no other gods before me, what about murder? Right? If you pick, honor your father and mother, what about don't commit adultery? Okay? Now, you can make some discussion about the linkage between those different commands and how they really all come down to one idea, but that's exactly what Jesus actually does here, right? By saying, love the Lord your God, he's actually saying, obey everything God teaches you. Now, we're going to get to this in a little bit more detail when we actually go look at the original occurrence in Deuteronomy, but let me just in advance tell you, because we're not going to actually go to chapter 5. Chapter 5 is the point where Moses says, here's the 10 Commandments again. That's the name of the book, by the way. Deuteronomos in Greek means second law or second reading of the law. It's the second time Moses reads the 10 Commandments out. And that's where the book Deuteronomy gets its name from. But in that context, after reading the 10 Commandments and before telling all these other things about like what to do if two men are fighting and they accidentally hurt a pregnant woman, for example, and all these other complicated things that the Old Testament teaches you about, Moses stops and says this very significant phrase, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And that "Hear, O Israel" part starts with the word Shema in Hebrew, which gives us the name for this prayer. In the morning and the evening, Jewish people will pray this prayer, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." And it is a way of recognizing the significance of the law to the individual Jewish person's life. And so in the context of this question, Jesus gives this man back a prayer he probably said that morning. And something that he will go home and say later that evening. Jesus says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." So that's the meaning and the context for this man as he asks the question and gets back his answer. But Jesus does something interesting. The last part of this is the same, is different in Jesus' interpretation than it is in the man's reply and is in Deuteronomy. Did you notice, just counting the number of words in Jesus' response, it happens to be a little different? Because in our English translation it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. But then when the man repeats the command back to Jesus, he says, love him with your heart, with your understanding, and with your strength. Okay, so there's a word missing there. The difference between these two different phrases is important, but it comes down to what actually is happening in the original Hebrew, which we'll get into in a moment with our interpretation from Deuteronomy itself. But for a moment, let's just look at what Jesus' interpretation, what's Jesus' translation of this phrase say here in the Greek that we have in Mark. He says, with your heart and with your soul. Heart and soul are cardia and psyche. These are the ideas of your heart as a physical organ, but also as the place where all of your thinking takes place. And your psyche, which is this idea of your living being, or your animated self. Now, in Greek philosophy and in the wider Hellenistic world, this has a lot of implications from the outside world. When a Greek speaker reads this, they might hear something like how the Greeks thought of the soul. Now, this is a problem that we still have in modern American and Western interpretations of the Bible, because we've inherited a little bit of the baggage from Greek philosophy. So, if you've ever seen a cartoon where Tom gets hit over the head by Jerry and his soul leaves his body as an angel playing a harp, that comes from this. The Greek, this problem we're talking about it, rather, the problem with Greek philosophy and the Greek religion was that they believed that all of this stuff, this fleshy stuff we're stuck in, is low, it's base, it's prone to corruption and decay, and so therefore the self, the pure self, is the soul, a transcendent thing that longs to escape the flesh and become something else, something ethereal and connected back to the transcendent slipstream of time. You go back to being like the stuff the gods are made out of. That's what the Greeks think. And the Christian interpretation and the Bible interpretation are different. But there's one little piece of the Venn diagram that's important, and why the New Testament translators and why the Old Testament Greek translators use the word psyche here. The overlap between the two concepts is the idea of the whole living being something more than just your flesh and bones, but having something of the totality of yourself being dedicated here. This leaves out something from the Hebrew, which we'll get to in just a moment, but helps to bridge the gap between the two concepts. So when you read soul here, you can just translate that to your whole being, okay? You can substitute out yourself in a whole sense, every part of yourself. Now, what's the distinction between that and your heart? What's the distinction between your heart, your mind, your thoughts and your feelings, your decisions, and yourself? Well, there's a little bit of yourself that goes underneath that. It's a lower form of yourself. Your instincts, your impulses, the things that you don't dedicate any thought to, but arise naturally. And then there's something else, which is the things that our mind puts out there and other people perceive about ourselves. There's something else about yourself that is your identity, what other people see when they see you, whether that's intended or not. And so there's more to yourself than just your thoughts, right? And so when you read soul, you're talking about the whole self, every part, as a being. And so the last part, when Jesus splits it up and he says, with your mind and with your strength, that's actually just one word in Hebrew, which we'll get into in a bit, and the complexity of that. But you can see what the response came back was. When he got this prayer repeated back to him, the man who said it back said, "Your strength," with your understanding instead of soul, and with your strength. So, the word strength is important there. Jesus is taking mind and soul as separate things, but this man has sort of put the mind and the soul back together in a sense by making it understanding, making it your thoughts or your way of thinking about things. But the whole point of what is being said in both of those cases is, what do you have available to you? Dedicate it to loving God and loving people. Love your neighbor as yourself. We just talked about how the soul and the heart, and you put all these pieces together, you get the self without leaving any gaps. And so then when the second commandment says, love your neighbor as yourself, all of those things you just considered as dedicated to God, protect your neighbor like you protect all of those things that you have dedicated to God. Your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Okay, now let's go back to our Old Testament so that we can link these things together and get a deeper understanding from both of these passages. Jesus is quoting in Deuteronomy chapter 6, starting in verse 4. We're going to be looking at this passage much in the same way the man he was responding to would have, as this sort of isolated passage from a greater thing. It's a little sort of bookmark in the middle of this passage, in between these 10 things that God himself wrote on the tablets and handed down to Moses. And the rest of the law is this passage that talks about the relationship between the lawgiver and the one who obeys. And in that context, he says the following. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That was verse 4, by the way. Verse 5, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Okay, I actually read a little bit more than I intended to there, but we'll work with it. Let's talk about what he means when he says all your soul and all your strength here in the Hebrew. Now, we already talked about the Hebrew word for heart. That's also showing up here. It's going to be that same term that we learned and that same concept that we already discussed. But if we take the other two words we haven't discussed here in this place, the soul and the strength, what is actually being said? Well, first of all, we have to acknowledge a little bit of a difference between the original Hebrew and what actually comes through in our English. And I'm going to start with the last word first here, strength. What is actually being said when they say your strength? The word actually is not typically used as a noun. It's normally an adverb. It usually means something like very much. When the spies go into the land and they find the milk and honey and they bring back the grapes, they say the land was very, very good. They use this word me'od, good. And so this word shows up here where he says, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your very much. Now, what does that mean in this context? Let's reflect on it. Let's think about it. Because let's start with the other two parts we know. You know what a heart is. We've discussed this for the last 2 lessons. It's all of your thoughts. It's your mind, your emotions, all of your decision-making skills, your will and determination to carry things through. The next part is maybe a little bit different. What's your soul? Describe a soul to me right now. Give me a definition. I'm just kidding. But if you had to, if I put you on the spot, can you? Besides the one we've already discussed where we talked about it being your whole being, it's really hard to nail down what a soul is because we want to think of it as a technical term. We want it to be anatomical. We want it to be like the heart. If I tell you to point where your heart is, you can do it right now. In fact, go ahead and do it. Point to your heart. Show me where your heart is. You know where it is. It's right here. It's in your chest. It's still beating. If you left your hand there long enough, you could probably feel it. But if I tell you to show me where your soul is, you kind of got to just go like this. It's here, somewhere. It's me. I'm my soul. And in fact, in Hebrew, that's exactly what's happening. The word soul in Hebrew, that's being translated to soul in English, in fact, is literally the word for throat, nephesh. Right here. This is your soul. You can point to it in Hebrew. This is your soul. Why? Because that's where your life flows through. You have to breathe. That's where your existence comes through. It's through your throat. And it has multiple poetic meanings beyond this in the Old Testament. But just focusing on the one right here specifically in this passage, when he says, love the Lord your God with your heart and with your soul, he's saying, with your whole life. Another thing that happens is when you're counting groups of people or animals in the Old Testament, you use the word nephesh. Like, you know how we say heads of cattle? It's a similar-ish kind of a thing. If you say, oh, well, I counted noses and we got all the kids in the car so we can leave, it's the same kind of idea. We mean individuals, people, as distinct living things. And you know what doesn't have a throat? What doesn't have a nephesh? Corpse. Can't refer to dead bodies using this word. It's only for living things. As long as you're breathing, you got a soul. That's the idea. And so here, you are dedicating to God. You are loving God as an active verb with your heart, all your decisions, all your thoughts, all of the things that you control, your will, your determination. Love your God with all of that and with your entire living being. Your strength, your body, your movements, your life itself is dedicated to God. So, getting back to our last word here, our me'od, our very much. You love God with your heart, with your living being, and with your muchness. Everything else. You know, one of the things that coaches who don't have anything better to say will often say is, I need you to give 110%. What do they mean when they say that? Well, first of all, they're not very creative, are they? I've heard that a million times. But what they mean is 100% is 100%. 100% is everything. But whatever everything you've got, give me a little bit more. Wherever you think your limitation is, push past it. Wherever you think you stop, go a little bit farther. So God says, love the Lord with your thoughts, your mind, your inward struggles, with your calculations, with your plans, with your will and determination. Love the Lord with your body, with your life, with your movements, and the things that you can do actively with all of this. And everything else. Everything you don't think you have. Push past your limitations in order to love God. Love the Lord with your muchness. You know, the meaning there, if we take it back to our New Testament and we look at what Jesus says, he splits that word into two words to get some of the meaning there. And he really sort of interprets it for us, because that word muchness can just mean whatever's beyond everything else that you have control of, just past your limitations. But he gives you two words to describe it: with your mind and with your strength, with your thoughts and your calculations, and with your power, your working. When the Septuagint translators were translating this word here, the meod, they used the word dunamis, or power. Dunamis, by the way, is where Alfred Nobel got the word dynamite from. That's the kind of power we're talking about. A potential energy that needs to be released. And so we've got a clue to the way that some of the interpretations could be applied. Beyond that, though, is verse 6. Because remember that this takes place in a context. We've got the rereading of the 10 Commandments in the previous chapter, and now we're going to get more commandments going forward. And this rereading of the 10 Commandments is part of the context for what's being said. These commandments I give you today are to be where? On your hearts. And that brings us to what the meaning of this commandment is. What's the verb that we are being commanded to carry out? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. And the first word of the next verse is love the Lord your God. Now, that is the action we are to undertake with all of these faculties that we have been spending so much time describing. So, you probably already know how to love the Lord with your heart. You probably already do that. You're a Christian. You probably also already know how to love the Lord with your whole being, with your nephesh, because you're here. You've got some of your whole being dedicated to sitting in that pew right now. The last part's the hard part, though. Do you know how to love the Lord with your strength, with your muchness, with your me'od? Jesus gave us a clue. He said, love the Lord with your mind and with your strength, with the products of your heart and your body, the things that come out of your life. But is that enough? Does that completely encapsulate everything? Because I think the original word really helps us to get at it. The theme that we're going to see continually going forward is that each of these little pieces, these little body parts we're talking about in our spiritual anatomy series, are really pointing at a totality of our own selves that we don't really fully know. That's the only reason we can give 110%. That's the only reason why the coach gives us that trite line. Because the coach, in this case God, standing from his perspective, says, I see what you can do. Why aren't you seeing it? Why are you the limiting factor in your potential? Why are you the one who's holding yourself back from your full capacity? If you've ever been coached before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And maybe you went out and made the basket, ran a little faster, whatever it was you needed to do. Maybe it sunk in. If it didn't, then I need you to let it sink in now. God says, yeah, you've given me everything, now give me more. I've seen your limitations, but I don't care about those. I want your full potential. And what does he want you to apply that full potential to? Loving him and loving your neighbor like that full self. Our dedication to God, our devotion to him, is not partial. It's holistic. And if we're not pursuing it like something that is worth our value of our full being, then we're just taking something away from God. I hope this lesson has been beneficial for you and given us some more insight on our own spiritual perspective and how the Bible talks about our limitations and what we can do as believers. I hope that it's something that we can apply to our daily lives and maybe will affect how we approach our relationships with believers and non-believers alike. If you haven't become a follower of Jesus and you'd like to dedicate your whole self, your heart, your soul, and your strength to him, we'd invite you to come forward, and we'll give you that opportunity as we stand and sing.